Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Rosie Murphy.
And I'm Sammy Roth. This is the podcast where every week we watch a new episode of Lost and we talk about it.
We have just watched Season 1, Episode 4, Walkabout.
We literally just watched it right now.
This is one of Sammy's all-time favorites, so let's get started. Sammy, jump right in. What's your hot take?
My hot take is that it's amazing that they're able to drop so many hints about Locke's paralysis without letting you in on what's happening. Mm-hmm. I remember the first time I watched it, so, blown away by the moment at the end where they do the reveal that he's in the wheelchair, and, I get the goosebumps watching him get up on the island the second time. But just now watching through it again, they have the scene with horrible, douchey Randy Nations at his office where...
he's awful.
So bad. You're going to do this all on your feet, and you really think you can do this, and you never see him on his feet during the episode. And he tells Randy the story about the double amputee, who was able to go in and do cool stuff. And you see the shots of him looking at his toes wiggling at the beginning, but it just doesn't register.
Well, and when he gets knocked out by the boar and he's laying flat on his back,
right?
The implication is like, oh shoot, he's re-paralyzed.
Right, and the second time that all comes through like, wow, this is really, it's amazing that it doesn't tip you off the first time through. Yeah. It's well constructed. Mm-hmm. What is your flaming hot take?
This is about something I like. I really, really love the memorial service. I think it's really human that like Claire and Hurley and their team would decide to put that together. And like when Claire's reading...
I guess she was going to catch a connecting flight. She wore corrective lenses, and she was an organ donor.
From the passports and the documents, like they know so little about these people, but yet they decided to honor them in some way. And there's a little bit of conversation at the beginning about burial and whether it's appropriate to burn the bodies, and would that respect these people's religions and their belief sets and stuff. And I don't know, I thought that was like a very real, sort of very compassionate concern for them to have, and I'm glad they included that.
It's also interesting that Jack has no interest in any of that.
Oh, Jack is a dick about it. Yeah. Like, full stop.
Even having, watched the whole show and supposedly knowing everything about Jack, I don't feel like I have a good sense of why it's so uncomfortable for him.
No, I don't either. My only thought is that he was supposed to be on his way to his father's funeral.
Right.
And he doesn't want to go to a funeral. But that feels like... that's totally unclear at this point.
It is.
And even though he's starting to see the flashes of his father, and I think we find out in the next episode, or whenever Jack gets his first episode, that he was bringing his father's body back, and they lost the body, and there was all that.
But you're right, it just seems kind of dickish.
Yeah. For our characters, we should start by talking about Locke, right?
We probably should.
Yes.
Can I, before we talk about Locke, can I cut in with one other character first?
Yeah, of course.
It'll be really quick. Shannon.
What about Shannon?
Shannon, I don't enjoy any of the storylines really with Shannon or Boone. I never thought those were fun characters to watch. But I will say that in this episode, Maggie Grace, the actor who plays Shannon, does a wonderful job at just being totally insufferable.
And manipulative, and
And those things, like, I don't know that I enjoy watching them, but that's probably because she's doing such a good job. In the scene with Charlie where she... let's go on a walk, kind of flirty, and then she
immediately asks, like, do you know how to fish?
She waited 5 seconds and interrupted his speech about how he was famous, and just made my skin crawl a little bit.
Yeah, but it's then you get this funny resolution where she feels like she's proved something to Boone,
right?
And they have their little tussle, and she feels victorious, and then poor Charlie is just left standing there, like, what happened?
I was a pawn in this game.
Yeah. But at least Charlie and Hurley got to have fun trying to catch the fish.
That was fun.
That was nice.
But yeah, let's talk about Locke. That's a good idea.
The whole episode's about Locke. So this is not an important point necessarily, but it's the one lingering question I had is, why does he lie about seeing the monster? Because it's pretty clear that he saw the smoke monster, right? Like when Kate and Michael are looking down, there's that shot of just his face, and he's like, just in shock.
And you get the monster point of view shot of the monster coming out of the trees.
Why does he lie about that?
If I had to answer that, I would say that it's, to him, knowing what we know later about Locke, this is a special moment where he has connected with the island in a personal way, and he feels like this is significant to him and part of his destiny.
Something's been revealed to him.
Yeah, and we get the scene in the next episode where he has the conversation with Jack where he says, I looked into the eye of the island and what I saw was beautiful.
Oh. Do you think that's a reference to this?
I have always assumed that it is.
Huh. I forgot about that.
And in fact, I thought that line was in this episode. I kept waiting for it, but no, it's next week.
Huh.
So to me, that's what's going on in his head. But you're right,
Okay.
it's difficult to say.
Yeah, because I hadn't even picked up on that the first time, that is what he was seeing. I don't know, I guess I just missed that shot or something.
I think this is the moment where he sort of, when he, I looked and what I saw was beautiful. I think that helps explain why at the end of the year when the monster's dragging him into the tunnel.
He's not afraid?
He's not afraid. He thinks it's okay. I think he sees this as a good thing.
Huh. Okay.
But I'm not sure.
That can work for me. What stood out to you about Locke?
I guess that in the first couple of episodes before this one, Locke was, and we talked about this last week, Locke is super weird.
Right. Barely appears. Every time he does appear, it's weird.
It is. He opens his mouth and there's an orange in it and he's smiling at Kate. And so I thought it was an interesting way to introduce this character who's sort of spiritual and mysterious and sort of at the heart of the mythology of the show and the mythology of the island, but to introduce him as this hunter type.
Yeah, because he really makes himself known when he throws that knife.
Exactly how are we going to find the sustenance? We hunt.
How'd you get that knife on the plane?
Checked it.
And everybody's like, who the hell is this guy? Like, Jack doesn't even know his name, right? Or something like that.
He hasn't talked to him in 4 days.
Yeah, because he's been so under the radar. And suddenly he's got this suitcase full of knives and this industrial vest and, like, is a hunter-gatherer. Yeah.
Which really turns out to not be who Locke is at all.
It just so happens that he was going on the walkabout and he had the materials. But
it's just, I think that if I watch this episode, it does not have a lot of the Locke who becomes my favorite character on the show, except arguably the moment at the end with the seeing his toes wiggle and getting up, which I think...
Right, and you see the wheelchair burning and all of that. Yeah.
That stuff with Helen, by the way, on the phone, that is so sad.
Oh my goodness, that's sad. Yeah. Yeah, and of course we learn later that Helen was a real person who he had a relationship with. And, it's fraught with all this stuff about his father and about being conned by his father, and she leaves him, and this woman's name on the phone probably isn't Helen. Like, he's ascribing this whole identity to her.
Yeah.
And they say it's like $89 an hour or something. Like, that is a crazy amount.
He is spending his whole salary on that.
And she tells him, like, he's about to hang up, and she says, like,
I thought you understood, Helen. You know me better than
John,
anyone.
if we talk any longer, I'm going to have to charge you for another hour. That's another $89.95. You can't afford
Look, I don't care about the money.
I'm sorry, John. I got to go.
Helen!
yeah, and he's alone. There's that shot of him, like, in his twin bed with, like, an empty beer on the nightstand, just on the phone, and it's, like, abject loneliness.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't think I have anything else on John.
Yeah, should we go to the Jack Bender?
Do we want to talk about what changed in hindsight for us?
Oh yeah, we do, of course.
Okay, I can start on this.
Yeah, go for it.
So the Jack Rose conversation.
Oh no, I was also going to bring up Rose. That's okay. Go for it.
That's so funny. This sort of a couple things about this. One is that obviously Rose turns out to be right. Bernard is still alive, and in fact, there are people on the other side of the island wondering the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, Rose and Locke have a lot of parallels for me. They both experience miracles, right? Like, Locke is healed, and Rose, we learn later, has cancer. And has terminal cancer, but she never dies.
Right.
She and Bernard live years on the island, just sort of by themselves in happiness, and then they presumably die natural deaths. They both experience miracles, and Rose, too, seems to be, throughout the series, like, really in tune with the island.
You're right, she does.
And not getting caught up in sort of what I guess we would consider the politics of the group, like the leadership struggles, and do we go to the beach or do we go to the caves, and the others, like, she just seems like she's very in touch with this sort of spiritualism of the island.
You're right, and I think you look at the self-assuredness with which she just knows that Bernard's alive.
Yeah.
Which in the moment kind of plays like, she's
in shock.
Yeah,
and,
she's coping, but in retrospect, you're right. Totally, it's she knows. I think there's something about L. Scott Caldwell, the actor who plays her, that just exudes that kind of wisdom and knowing.
Yeah.
She communicates a lot just in the way she carries herself, which I think maybe speaks to some of what you're saying.
Yeah. She knows she has cancer. She knows she's dying anyway. So maybe, there's a lot of psychological factors at work too, but she also seems to sort of connect with the island or whatever that is.
Well, that's a thought there about knowing that she's going to die anyway, because there's that line. Is it this episode or is it Tabula Rasa last week? Yeah, it was last week where Jack said to Kate, 3 days ago we all died, and now we're starting over. But it's
right.
But she was already going to die.
Right, and wasn't their Australia trip like they were just traveling? Because
they were
she
going
only had a year
to see that healer, weren't they? Weren't they
Oh,
going to go
that's
see a
right.
healer?
They were going to go see a faith healer.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. I'd totally forgot.
But it
about
is
that.
sort of, I mean, maybe you could make the case of, like, for her, the island is a rebirth. She was already dead, and now she is back to life.
Yeah, that's true. But the question then is, if the island is purgatory, or if it was once conceived of as purgatory, why is she there? Like, if she was already at peace, why is she there?
Because it's not a perfect metaphor. I don't know. You're right.
Anyway.
Sorry. Digression.
We have really. What was your hindsight?
My
answer?
hindsight.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I was also going to raise Rosenberg, but just a very slightly different angle, which was that it made me smile watching the Rose bit, because I was thinking, it's so nice that Rose and Bernard do find each other and get sort of a happy ending together. It's really, you could make a case that might be the only true happy ending on the show.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
So it was just, seeing the introduction of, Rose here as a character. It's just like, oh, I'm so glad that things work out for Rose.
She deserves it.
Yeah, the show needs that too.
Indeed.
That's my hindsight.
All right. Well, we've got even more from Jack Bender.
Yes, more from the interview we did with him at his home in L.A., asked him some questions, and we're going to play some clips.
And he, of course, he directed this episode.
He did.
The first episode, pretty much which first episodes of shows usually do, they kind of just follow along the lines of the pilot and get the audience deeper into the story.
So when you say the first two episodes, you mean the two after the pilot?
Yes, the two after the pilot.
Okay.
And frequently, the first episode after the pilot, because it becomes a little bit of a just continuation of the pilot, and you're going to be shooting it in less time with less of a budget, because that's the way series television works, is that when there's a pilot, they spend a lot more money than on the show. And you got to figure out how to maintain it and even make it better. So we did the first step. I directed the first two, and the second one was Walkabout. And Walkabout was when we found the show. It ended up being a great episode. It was a great script, and that was when we found it. And there were a number of revelations in directing that episode. The first was the writer who wrote the episode and was at the time one of our exec producers, who will remain nameless, was when Damon Lindelof walked into the writer's room. And at that point, JJ was no longer there. JJ was there to help us conceive and come up with some ideas and look at the first few cuts of the first few shows. And then JJ went off to do Mission Impossible. So Damon and I were left alone. And Damon came in with the idea that Locke was in a wheelchair until he landed on the island. And then the whole idea of the walkabout and all of that. And the writer, exec producer on the show, thought that was the worst idea he'd ever heard. And basically said to Damon, if you do that, the show's over.
I can see why you didn't name this person.
Yes. And he's gone on to do really great work, and he's a really smart guy and a really good writer. He just hated that idea. Damon, God bless him, had the creative balls to stick with the idea and said, no, that's what we're going to do. And then, of course, that writer was nominated for an Emmy for the episode, and I think ended up coming on board. But there were a number of things directorially, and that was, I thought, okay, how are the flashbacks going to look different than the island? And when I say I found it during Walkabout, it was true, because Locke's past was that he not only was in a wheelchair, which we couldn't reveal until the end, but he also worked in a boring box company in West Covina. And I saw that world as very beige and brown and sort of angles and not a lot of fluidity, along with the fact that I had the task never to see his wheelchair. So we had to design things and put him in situations like behind his desk, and I had to shoot it from such an angle that the desk wasn't up to his chin, so it would look foolish, but you wouldn't know that the guy was in a wheelchair. And I knew that I wouldn't be doing a lot of camera moves and dolly moves, because eventually you would reveal the wheelchair. So I came up with the notion that, okay, for the flashbacks, we're not going to do any camera moves. No fancy-ass camera. It's going to be cuts and angles, and we're going to make it look like a very cardboard boxy world, subtly. And I said, no green or blue in any of the flashbacks, because those were going to be the primary colors, being the jungle and the ocean on the island. And then I said, on the island, we can do long lenses and Steadicam and camera moves and all the stuff we want to do to give it more visual panache. But in the flashbacks, no. Well, we did that, and then, of course, when we reveal Locke in the wheelchair when he's at the travel agency and being denied access to the bus where he was going to go on the Walkabout, that's where I did the first camera move in the flashback, where we come around and reveal him in a wheelchair. Well, that episode was great. And it was considered really, it's where we found the show after the pilot, and people loved it. And we were all very proud of it. So I said, okay, here are the rules. As exec producer, the guy who was the creative head of what our show was going to look like in, making it, directorially, I said, okay, they'll be in flashbacks. We're going to do no camera moves, and we're going to make it more classic cinema, just cuts, wider lenses, closer, and no green or blue in any flashbacks. Which we maintained for the first few episodes. And then a director came on the show who was doing, I think it was Yunjin and Daniel's flashback in their wedding, and it had some romance. And we had the Chinese the Korean lanterns, forgive me, outside at the palace and all this stuff, and it was beautiful and romantic. And he said, a long lens and a camera move would be really pretty here. And I happened to be on the set. And I went, yeah, you're right, there goes that rule, which happens. You have these rules, you have this design, and then something comes along in the storytelling where you don't completely abandon ship and throw it out, but you alter the plan. But going back to Walkabout, it was very much, okay, this is our show.
Were there other things you did after that to try to make the flashbacks feel different from what was happening on the island?
Well, I think I did, and I think directorially, I remember there were some things, I never wanted the show to be handheld until it felt appropriate. Like one of the first times in Walkabout, I'm very proud of the design of this because, and these are the things as a director you think about when you're prepping by yourself or surrounded by your team in prep, but not on the set. And then, of course, there are things, I call that homework, and then there are things on the set that happen spontaneously with actors and everything and camera and all those wonderful things when you're actually giving it life and putting it together, where you wouldn't think of those things when you're doing your homework. So it really is a combination of the two, and you have to be open, I think, as a good director. But there was, in the same episode, Walkabout, there was it was the first time that the survivors were on the beach and started arguing. And it was starting to fracture and come apart, where they realized they were losing food. And Hurley is saying, we don't have as much food, and blah, 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 and there starts to be panic among...
Is this when Jack runs in and makes a speech?
Yeah, well, Locke does. I said, okay, let's let all this be handheld and chaotic. When the people start falling apart and getting upset, and there was a little bit of a tussle and an argument with Hurley and somebody, I can't remember, and I said, this is all going to be handheld and chaotic. And then Sawyer sits down. It was written that a knife hits a tree. And I had him sit down on one of the abandoned, crashed airline seats. And then a knife flies into frame and hits him. It hits the chair. That was Freudian. If it would have hit him, it wouldn't have been good for our show. So it hit the chair next to him, and he looks at it, and that's when Locke he becomes dad at that moment and does that speech. And then I do a slow Dalian, a heroic Dalian move on him just as he's talking. Very Spielbergian, you know. And it was really a great idea because although it wasn't revolutionary filmmaking, it used the technique of different ways to shoot a scene in a way that really told the story, which I always wanted Lost to be. Style and content come together, which I think is what good cinema is, as opposed to style over content and flashy camera moves and all that jazz just to keep the audience interested. You know, we had a much more big, cinematic, classic David Lean, Stanley Kubrick, and at times other stuff approach to the show.
So I just want to say that he, Jack talked about that director, executive producer who didn't like the idea of Locke being in the wheelchair and thought it was terrible. Jack was too polite to name him in a negative context, but you should know his name is David Fury. He was involved with many great TV shows. He was on Angel and Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Fringe, and he was responsible in some way for some of the best seasons of 24 as well. So very accomplished person who was definitely wrong about Locke being in the wheelchair.
Okay, well, since that was a long one, let's go ahead and leave it there. Just a reminder that next week we are going to watch Season 1, Episode 5, White Rabbit. This is where, I think it's our first Jack episode, right? So please watch it over the course of the week. Give us a call and leave us your hot take. The number where you can do that is 9546-DHARMA. Let's see, what else? Our theme music is called Just a Blip. It's by Andy G. Cohen. You can come find us on Facebook, facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast.
Also on Twitter, at The Hatch Podcast on Twitter. And please rate, review on iTunes so that more people find us.
Thank you so much for listening, and namaste.